trying to log in. Can we give him just a few moments, please?
I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was on mute. Thank you for being gracious with your time. It's now 5 minutes after 2 o'clock. Mr. Philemon, sorry, has not logged in as yet.
He has joined just now.
Oh, he is. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, there he is. All right, thank you so much. We shall proceed. My name is Masinate Molabo from the SADC Parliamentary Forum. I'm the project manager for the Trade, Finance, Industry and Investment Committee. Thank you, and I greet you all this afternoon. I would like to welcome you honorable members who have joined, members of the civil society, the media, colleagues from Parliament, on this SADC Parliamentary Forum consultation on the model law on prison oversight. This afternoon, the overarching discussion is a consultation on supporting the needs of persons with disabilities through improved prison oversight. And I wish to welcome the Executive Director at Disability, HIV and AIDS Trust, Mr. Philemon Simwab. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And before he comes on the platform, I'd like to read Mr. Philemon's extensive biography. He is a distinguished leader and advocate in the fields of disability, health, and social development across Africa. He currently serves as the Executive Director of Disability, HIV and AIDS Trust in Zimbabwe, a position he has held since 2006. He combines his practical experience with strong academic credentials, holding a Master's in Business Administration, MBA, from Zimbabwe Open University. Mr. Philemon's commitment to disability and development work is both professional and personal. He is an amputee and has dedicated his career to promoting disability inclusion, human rights, and equitable access to health and education. Over the years, he has provided consultancy services for organizations such as UNAIDS, Oxfam, Leonard Cheshire, SASFORD, and various regional NGOs, focusing on strategic planning, program evaluation, and disability inclusive policy development. He also serves on multiple boards and committees, including the African Campaign on HIV and Disability, the Child Care Ministry Board, and previously the Voluntary Service Organization, VSO. A respected voice in international disability and health circles, Philemon is affiliated with the International AIDS Society, Southern Africa Institute of Fundraising, and the International Disability and Development Consortium, where he has served in leadership roles, including as interim deputy chairperson of ADD International UK. Known for his dedication, strategic vision, and tireless work ethic, Philemon combines in-depth understanding of disability and human rights with practical expertise in development, programming, making him a leading figure in promoting inclusive development across the region. I'd like to welcome you, Mr. Philemon Simwaba, to the floor to make your submission. I thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Molapo.
Yes.
And I want to say good afternoon to all who are in this forum. Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Philemon Simwaba. I'm the Executive Director for Disability, HIV and AIDS Trust, which promotes disability and health issues in SADC region and also across Africa. Yeah, today I'm humbled and privileged to be in this forum to talk about issues of disability and prisons, especially basing on the accessibility of persons with disabilities in prisons, vis-a-vis looking at the Article number 2 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I had the chance last week to actually attend the same forum, it should be last week or the other week. And I asked a few questions to say, look, we are talking about women and prisons, their accessibility and other things, the challenge that they face. Then I posed the question, I said, what about persons with disabilities? Because we are also prone to be incarcerated in prisons, and we are finding a lot of challenges. So today, I think we'll look at the model law, SADC PF model law, vis-a-vis the rights of persons with disabilities, looking at issues of accessibility to the infrastructure, especially prisons. And this afternoon, I would actually start by looking at how do we promote or ensure that the rights of persons with disabilities are respected and protected within the prisons in our SADC parliamentary forums and prisons. Many times, persons with disabilities, once they are in prison, they face a lot of challenges. The first one is inadequate infrastructure. Prisons often lack accessible infrastructures, making it difficult for persons with disabilities to navigate and access basic facilities in prison. I would give a very good example. Somebody in a wheelchair, I don't think most of the prisons that we have in our region are accessible for a person that is on a wheelchair to be in prison and enjoy the rights of movements. There are very few. It would be very good for the SADC PF to carry out an assessment in these countries to see how the governments have actually renovated their prisons to have access for persons with disabilities. And also the other issue is the insufficient health care. Most prisons in our region, probably maybe just South Africa and other few countries, where you'll find that prisons continue to struggle to provide adequate health care services, including mental health support and treatment for chronic conditions which can increase disability for the inmates. These are the issues that we should look at regarding the policies and legislation for our leaders in parliament. What have they really done to this situation? Thirdly, the issue of discrimination and stigma still persists. Persons with disabilities many times or may face discrimination and abuse within prison systems, which further marginalize their position in these prisons. There is also limited access to education, lack of resources and programs to provide vocational training and rehabilitation for persons with disabilities in these prisons. And lastly, increased vulnerability of persons with disabilities in these prisons. Persons with disabilities are more exposed to abuse, exploitation, and negligence or neglect due to their vulnerability in these prisons. One thing that I want to actually pose to all of us who are in this forum, we are all prone to disability. Anything can happen anytime. So it's better when we are in these positions to prepare ourselves to say, in case I happen to acquire a disability, how am I going to be treated? Many leaders, they forget that. They come to realize when they're in the situation. And they've now started realizing that if I knew in my position where I was, having access to change of these policies, I would have done ABCD. I think it's time now to do it now. It's time to do it now. I'm really grateful and thankful to the SADC PF to bring up this issue. There are many other people that can come in and join me, maybe to give us just a brief background of what they've done in their countries, especially our leaders, the parliamentarians, regarding disability and access to prisons. I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Philemon Zimwaba. You're saying actually we should make the law as though we're making it for ourselves, because at a blink of an eye, one could be in that position. Thank you. What I got from your submission is we should look at infrastructure in prisons for disabled persons, the rights of persons in prison, the healthcare of prisons, persons who are disabled in prisons, stigma and discrimination, the education of people who are disabled, vocational training. I think this one is very particular because vocational training for disabled persons is probably is very particular and specific. Also, abuse and negligence of persons living with disabilities. I thank you very much for your submission today. It will give us a bone to chew on. Thank you so much. Our next submission will be from our consultant, Anike Mirakota, to give us information or to give us what the model law holds for us as we discuss persons living with disabilities. Thank you, Anike.
Thanks so much, Ms. Malapo, and thank you, Mr. Simwaba. I think it's important that we emphasize the vulnerability of persons with disability as we look into what we do with the model law to improve oversight. And so I'll raise some areas where we need to think about how to improve it as it relates to persons with disabilities, and then colleagues from the technical working group and other people on the call can perhaps then come in to add to that. So the model law provides for specific principles around transparency, accountability, and fairness, and the empowerment of prisoners and consideration of the needs of vulnerable populations. Now, the empowerment of prisoners, I think, is critical when we speak about persons with disabilities, because it does require that oversight bodies look very critically at themselves and the extent to which they are empowering all prisoners to access oversight mechanisms in an equitable and fair way. And I think oversight bodies themselves are supposed to be accountable. So they need to be able to account for the extent to which they provide access to themselves for persons with disabilities. And there's various other principles in relation to the oversight bodies as well, including looking at the practices around early release. Now, I mention this because when it comes to persons with disabilities, in some instances, people are detained indefinitely in places of detention, simply on the basis that they could perhaps not stand trial, or because there might not be anywhere else for them to be taken to. And this is often linked to the lack of access to legal representation and the failure within our criminal justice system to consider the needs of persons with disabilities. And particularly, as Mr. Simwaba mentioned, the mental health needs of persons in detention and what they would need vocationally to assist them post their release to reintegrate into society. So within the prison system, there is usually a complaints mechanism, and oversight bodies need to look at whether or not these complaints mechanisms are accessible. And I mention this here because when it comes to persons with disabilities, there might be various ways in which complaints mechanisms are inaccessible to them because they might not be properly informed of the availability of the mechanisms. They might, like the speaker have mentioned, be at particular risk of abuse, so they might face reprisals where they do complain, and they might not be able to access the relevant complaints mechanisms, especially external complaints mechanisms. So all of this must be taken into account when an oversight body then considers whether a complaints management system in a prison is functioning properly. I'll leave that for that. And then we have various independent official visitors who are able to, through legislation, conduct oversight visits at prisons. And in countries which have persons with disabilities legislation, there's often a disability council or board, and it's important that they are also provided with access to places of detention so that they can see specifically whether the needs of all persons with disabilities are taken into account. Then there are judges who visit places of detention also to conduct oversight. And again, judges ought to be aware of the various needs of persons with disabilities. And often it's very, there are so many things that one don't often consider. And I think if there are persons with disabilities on the school, I think it's important to reflect on the many ways in which prisons can actually amount to torture for persons with disabilities. If one just look at the actual conditions in detention, the noise, the light, the physical access, how it affects people mentally. Lots of issues can be important to consider, the lack of access to bathroom facilities and many other things. And I think it's important to be aware of those issues and to specifically consult with persons with disabilities when one do conduct oversight. And then there are national human rights institutions, and these would include your Human Rights Commission or your Ombud in all our countries. And it would be important, again, that the national human rights institutions have within their body people who are experienced around the needs of persons with disabilities, who can then join any visits to places of detention to ensure that their needs are considered properly. And there might be other ways in which one can also do that through the use of independent visitor committees, which can, for example, include people within the local vicinity of the prison who might have a disability or be trained around disability issues to regularly inspect a prison and see if they comply. And then all countries increasingly aspire towards having independent correctional center oversight bodies. And the model law sets out some criteria for them. But again, it's important that these bodies collaborate and coordinate with disability-related organizations, civil society, and disability boards and social workers and other government departments who might be able to support them in assessing whether prisons correctly and adequately and reasonably meet the needs of persons with disabilities. So when we look at the protection of vulnerable groups, there are specific issues relating to persons with disabilities. And the main thing is that the oversight bodies must know what it is that they're looking for when they conduct visits, so that they place particular attention to the needs of persons with disabilities. And it might be useful to extend this oversight not just to prisons, but to police stations, psychiatric units, and immigration detention units, because often you find persons with disabilities in other places within a prison where access isn't often that easy to conduct oversight. What would be important to for oversight bodies would be to employ people who have expertise on human rights and disability, on disability support, communications methods, and supported decision making. And it would include people with disabilities as peer monitors during oversight inspections. What's also important is to look at non-consensual treatment and practices, and any sort of arbitrary and discriminatory treatment of persons with disabilities, or lack of services, or denial of services, or perhaps not providing them with the supports they need to be able to access services to the same extent as other prisoners. And then it's important to recognize the very many different forms of disability, and to ensure that correctional center staff are trained on all forms of disabilities so they can provide the support that people would need. And that would be these other provisions around marginalized groups. There's concern specifically around sexual violence. And again, if we look at persons with disabilities and their risk of sexual violence, one need to think about how do you support them to complain where they have experienced violence, or to report it, and to not face reprisals, and that those where people do report sexual violence, that they receive a trauma-informed survivor response, and that their situation is actually attended to, so they're not continuing to be exposed to such violence. And then the model law speaks a little bit about the minimum training requirements for oversight bodies. And this includes that people who conduct oversight need to know all the regional and international minimum standards, and that would include as they relate to persons with disabilities. And they need to also know how to interview and communicate with different vulnerable groups within the prison itself. And then we would recommend that there be certain mandatory reporting that all correctional centers must do. And this mandatory reporting must then be fed through to oversight bodies so that they can assess whether there are particular issues that ought to be attended to. And this would include disaggregated data in relation to persons with disabilities. And I think it would be useful for people in the chat box, or people who raise their hands, to speak a bit more about what data would be useful to collect for there to be improved services for persons with disabilities within the prison system. And then finally, I think when we look at parliamentary oversight, here people often say that there ought to be a specific portfolio committee or select committee that deals with prisons and visits prisons. But it might also be critical for those portfolio committees that deal with disability to visit prisons as well, and for them to be involved in aspects of oversight. So I'm just leaving that there. These are all ideas on how one can improve oversight, and it's really for this to be a consultation and people to add to that or share best practices. Thanks, Ms. Malapo.
Thank you, Anneke, for that. What really caught my eye is particularly on the training of prison officers to be able to handle a different array of disabilities, because you usually find disability being clustered in one box, that it's disability, whereas there's an array and different kinds of disabilities that need to be handled, each according to individualism. Thank you, Anneke. And for now, colleagues, it's time where we interact with Anneke to give feedback, lived experiences, country experiences, to enrich the model law. I think we have a few submissions on the chat box. Also, for those who wish to use the different languages. We have the interpretation box there. We have different languages, English, Portuguese, and French. Also, you can use the react button and raise your hand if you wish to speak. I will read the messages we have from Winfred, the Executive Director of Mubende Women with Disability Associations, Uganda. We also need to look at the inclusive, like for those with hearing problems, we need to advocate for the inclusive of sign languages in school curriculum and syllabus so that the prison officers know how to communicate with us. This is what you had just talked about, that officers need to be trained to be able to handle different kinds of disabilities. Paul Chope raises the point of disaggregated data is needed. Statistics will inform budget and also inform us how we are doing in addressing challenges. Another submission from Winfred. Also, when it comes to tortures that take place in many detention centers, many disabled persons acquire psychosocial disabilities, and this makes them to have double disabilities. Here I say we should tell our government boldly to stop torturing prisoners with or without disability. Another submission from Philemon. I agree with Winfred on advocacy for sign language, inclusiveness in schools and prisons. Prison management should have a way to communicate with hearing impaired friends. A submission from Nomtanda Sompande from Hoki Foundation in South Africa. The prisons are not designed to handle inmates with disabilities. I'd like to suggest that there's a process to include occupational therapists to ascertain the level of support required as disabilities are different. Have added support based on reasonable accommodations such as wheelchairs, braille, etc. We have a submission from Komane Ralijwe. Train to be prioritized to correctional facilities to create inclusive environment for persons with disabilities. They already experience barriers outside prisons. It must really be hard for them in prison. The last one is from Winfred again. There is also need to categorize the disability categories because sometimes you find people benefiting from disabilities incentives when they are not disabled. Is there anything to interact with that, Anike?
This aggregation of data, I think, is critical, and it would be useful if people can suggest what some of the data might be that one could include in the model law for mandatory reporting. I mean, would it be around the different types of disabilities, and would there be cross-cutting data that one could obtain? I'm just asking because this is a field I'm not that familiar with, and I think people there might be existing tools out there around what sort of data would be helpful. Earlier this morning, we spoke about children with disabilities. I know there's different cross-cutting vulnerabilities also that one can look at. And then importantly, in the case of children with disabilities, how do one even provide that additional support around their education and their participation in recreational activities? So yeah, I've noted that the point about occupational therapists, I think we actually should include in the model law, because I think that's so sorely lacking everywhere. And that's definitely something that needs to be attended to. I'll leave that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Before your submission, please say your name and also the organization that you come from, please. You may take the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name is Mpho Chope. I run an organization called Albinism Advocacy for Access, but we also deal with various disabilities. My 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 input is on disaggregated data. Now, as my learned colleague was saying there, we need to expand on that. We need to know like how many people with disabilities are of this condition and of another condition. If they are, because this information will not only inform us to, for an example, is there issues that we can solve so that we don't have a lot of challenges. I'll make an example with regards to it will even inform our police stations. For an example, sometimes we look at prisons. I know I'm outside, but sometimes you find that our police stations don't have sign languages. So if people come with disability, come with issues, those issues cannot be addressed, and maybe they take law into their own hands. So if we know that maybe there's a lot of people with maybe albinism in prisons, then we can say, what is the root cause of this? And also, it also informs of the reasonable accommodations that would be there, because if there's maybe many people who are wheelchair users, then the reasonable accommodation would be assisted in that way. So that's my take on that, and also to sort of inform, like we are doing right now, inform different organizations dealing with disabilities on what on this the policies that we're making here, so that the inputs can be made. For an example, if deaf community can say, deaf SA in regards to South Africa, or blind SA to input, this is what you should look out for if persons with who comes to prison are maybe blind. And then autism also would have their specific suggestions. So that's my input. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions, Aneke, from Paul?
No, I think you can continue taking the other hands. Thanks.
Thank you. I see a hand from Chipo.
Okay, so good afternoon. I hope it's afternoon for everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Chipom Shotankata. I'm a law lecturer and researcher in the School of Law at the University of Zambia. I'm also a member of the technical working group that is considering the drafting of this model law on prison oversight studying. I just wanted to write on the comments that have been made in terms of data, but also what our oversight role should look like for persons. I agree that we need to know in any given prison what the demographics are and the nature of the disability of the persons that are occupying the correctional facility. I think it's also important for us to emphasize that in the routine work of all oversight bodies, they should be able to look out for things that affect persons with disabilities and prevent them from enjoying their rights on an equal basis with others. And I think we already heard from the keynote speaker different challenges that are being experienced. There's a tendency to deal with this as a homogeneous, as we tend to do women and other groups. So that kind of desegregation would be useful. That for oversight bodies, to also think about some of the community-based interventions, because I know with disability, it's not a subject that's very well known in our criminal justice systems, even if our laws do document different interventions for promoting and protecting the rights of persons with disabilities. But we know that in practice, a very good law would not be realized because people just don't know what to do. So the emphasis on the training, capacity building of institutions should recognize their usual mandates, because I don't think we'll have a special oversight body for disability alone. And so to have those intersecting issues inform all oversight mechanisms, so that in the everyday works of, for example, Human Rights Commission or Gender Equity and Equality Commission, or whoever else is carrying out such work, they're able to also note the different disability issues. So I think that that's the contribution that I've.
Thank you, Chipo, a member of the technical working group. I think we have a few submissions on the chat from Ravind. Hope I said that correctly. Resources, technical, financial, and human trained personnel need to be allocated for the operation of special wards in prisons dedicated to cater for persons with disabilities. Mauritius has established a geriatric ward in one of its prisons to cater for elderly persons and those with disabilities. However, we need also the collaboration of specialist NGO dealing with such categories of prisoners. From DCP Lugan, Mauritian Prison Service. From Untifile, the surname, I don't want to butcher your surname. From Botswana, as someone who runs an inclusive preschool, the Beehive Academy, I have seen firsthand how exclusion begins very early in life. Many children with learning disabilities grow up already knowing they don't belong, because our system, from education to healthcare, often overlook their needs. So when such individuals end up in prison, the sense of exclusion is multiplied. It's not just about disability anymore, it's about being unseen twice over, first by society, then by the system meant to correct and rehabilitate. To strengthen oversight mechanisms, we need to embed inclusive training for correctional staff, integrate disability assessment into intake procedures, and collaborate with disability-focused organizations to ensure that every person, regardless of ability, is treated with dignity, accessibility, and understanding. And one from Vitalina says it is important that inmate admission records indicate whether or not the inmate has a disability. This allows for an investigation if a change in status occurs, as this may have resulted from torture, ill treatment, or severe degrading treatment. This could include something affecting vision, hearing, mobility, limbs, or mental health. Vitalina Papadakis, Mozambique. Sorry if I missaid your name. From Samuel. Rehabilitation, physiotherapy, occupation therapy services are also vital in correctional services to avoid further disability, and some of the inmates get. Can somebody mute their mic, please? Jane? The last one is from Samuel. Rehabilitation, physiotherapy, occupation therapy services are also vital in the correctional services to avoid further disabilities. And some of the inmates get the disabilities right in the prison, so there is need for constant services that prevent further disabilities. It's Samuel Ulili, Step Up Malawi. Ronald, sorry, please.
Sorry, Samuel, can you perhaps mute your microphone, please? We can hear your conversation. Samuel? Okay. That did the trick. I've taken note of some of the comments people had. So if I can just ask, so this has been a question that has come up repeatedly around official visitors, and people were wondering the extent to which civil society organizations ought to be able to access prisons. And the sense that I get from this specific meeting is that it is unlikely that we will ever be able to rely solely on government to do proper oversight in relation to persons with disabilities. And that it might therefore be very important that we designate civil society organizations who work with persons with disabilities as official visitors within the model law. And I'm just thinking that you also get so many different types of disability-led organizations that it might then assist to ensure that there is also better consideration of the very different needs of persons depending on their disabilities. So I want to put that out there around having disability organizations listed as official visitors within the model law. And then the other thing I wanted to ask, and perhaps this is linked to the work that you're doing as well. The other day I was at a election awareness event in Malawi at one of the prisons, and for about 3 hours, all the prisoners were outside in the open, in a square in the sun. And different persons with different disabilities can be very acutely affected by that in itself. And that could even amount to cruel and degrading treatment if people aren't being provided with or their specific disabilities are not accommodated. So any comments on that might be useful, because I think there are some disabilities that are better regarded within the prison system than others. And that has historically been the case, that some disabilities are perhaps more, people aren't as conversant with them or recognizing them. So I'm just putting that out there in case people feel that there's specific attention that we need to make to take off of any sort of specific needs that people might have. And then the other issue was around resources, and it was mentioned by someone from within the prison itself, which is encouraging around technical, financial, and human resources that are needed from the Mauritius Prison Service. And I'm wondering whether it would be important for us to then, when we speak about budgetary oversight by Parliament, to actually specify that parliaments need to make sure that they budget in relation to training around disability and in relation to personnel required around disability. So I know there are many vulnerable groups that need the same levels of support, but I would want to hear from people whether they would want to see specific recommendations in relation to disability within the model law and what that might be. I'll leave it at that, Ms. Malapi.
Thank you. I don't know if your hand was up from before, Chipo, or you want to make another submission.
Okay, it's not a submission, a new submission, but a response to one of the issues that Nick has just raised. And I think this was in response to one of the other contributions on government's capacity to run oversight, provide oversight for disability issues in prisons. Whereas we do recognize the weaknesses that exist in governments, it's ultimately their obligation at international and regional level. And they do sign these human rights normative standards that give them that obligation to provide oversight and ensure that rights are upheld and respected. So I do agree with the recognition of civil society organizations to provide some of this oversight, but not to the exclusion of government. So we need to just figure out how we can ensure that they are collaborating, that we're building capacities where government lacks the capacity, the work that it needs to. And that's the response that I want to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see your hand. There was a hand before yours, Mpho. Don't know if Mpho, you may go ahead.
Thank you. I think with regards to, I'll just say 2 points. With regards to civil society joining in, I agree with the lady before that it shouldn't exclude government. Perhaps what we can do is the disability organizations to say you can actually check, and if there's anything that is not good, then you can report to maybe a specific, maybe we can do it provincially or nationally, that there's that person appointed to handle all these issues that relating to disabilities. Because if sometimes we need to have one person who would, or in a province maybe, who is able to check various disabilities, because some might not be there, but their violations might be there. So you need to be sort of knowledgeable about disabilities, but obviously ask organizations to say, by the way, you are allowed to go and check within the prisons, any prisons and any prison in the country. And if so, this is the people that you need to contact to ensure that this is taken into account. That is that. And with regards to that incident where people were some prisoners were exposed to the sun, I mean, it can also be involved with albinism, for an example, that mandatory rules like that, they should take into consideration the person's disability. And if a person is with albinism and is exposed to the sun, obviously that could be detrimental in terms of skin cancer and whatnot. So or they need to be provided with hats when they go out to the yard. So it's things like that we are talking about when we say reasonable accommodation to the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mpho. There's a new chat. It says, I draw attention to special attention that must also be given to people with albinism. It's from a judge in Mozambique. Thank you. It's Talina Papadakis. Thank you. I hope I'm saying that right. Special attention for people with albinism.
Can I comment?
Sure, Mpo.
I would say, for an example, the fact that I mean, how many some are said you need to go outside and and if there's no sunscreens, for an example, if there's lighting that is not that is problematic for people with albinism, that could be, and also the myths associated. So there is also an as much as we are training, and this is also an important thing. As long as much as we are training officials, we must not forget to train in prisoners, fellow prisoners of these members, so that they know about the disabilities, and so to not avoid or only inform the prison warders and those, but not inform those, because the fellow prisoners, because those myths perpetuate from outside. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your submission. There was a hand up. I don't know if the hand keeps coming up and down. From Speto Somusa. Would you like to make a submission, please?
Yes, thank you very much, our facilitator.
Thank you.
I'm Commissioner Chinova from Zimbabwe Prisons and Correctional Service. I've been following the discussion that is underway, and I'm excited about all the contributions that are coming. I also wanted to emphasize the issue of the importance that the civil society organization play when it comes to persons with disabilities that are in prison. Let me mention that when we admit inmates, including those with disabilities, on admission, it is noted that one has either health issues or they have some disability which they have. But the challenge then comes to say, if you are not capacitated to deal with that kind of disability, what do you do? There is nothing you can do. So we then need the civil society organizations to come on board, and also the model law to then specifically put a burden, or rather a task, upon governments to ensure that they attend to the issues of persons with disability, so that our work is also made easier. Let me give you an example of the importance of civil society organizations, how we have worked with them here in Zimbabwe in issues concerning children. At one point, we had Justice for Children Trust. We had an arrangement whereby if we admit children, they were just a phone call away to say, please let us know. And they come and attend to the needs of those children, whether they want to apply for bail, whether they want to make an appeal, they would attend to that. So that kind of an arrangement with civil society organizations, when it comes to persons with disabilities, it will also assist with that. They will be able to come on board and assist us where they can, assuming maybe somebody with hearing impairments, they will be able to come and assist. So that will be my contribution. Then the issue of training, of course, it's important. As correctional officers, we have specific things that we are trained on. But usually the issues of persons living with persons with disabilities, they do not really form part of our curricula. So that training is important for us to then know how to deal with these persons when they come into prison. We also need to emphasize the issue of rehabilitation activities. They are generalized the assumption is everyone can do these rehab activities, if it is knitting, if it is maybe gardening, those kind of stuff. But you see now that when it comes to persons with disabilities, it means we are disadvantaging them because they cannot take part in those rehab activities that we are offering in prisons. So we also need rehabilitation activities that are specific to people living with disabilities, depending on one's disability. I think for now, that would be my contribution. I thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Commissioner, for the lived experiences of Zimbabwe. That is very, very helpful. Any more submissions or anything to add on that, Aneke?
I just want to agree with you, Ms. Malapo. I want to thank Commissioner Chinopva on her contributions. I've really noted them all down because I think it shows the useful role that civil society can play to deal with specific vulnerable groups where they can then be alerted, and one can, if someone is brought into the facility, and that organization can then perhaps come in to assess if additional support might be required and even help source that sort of support. So I think it is important to have those sort of mechanisms in place. Yeah, and I note the points actually about how deficient training programs are at the moment. I also like the point about rehabilitation activities, because what we have noted in many of the webinars are that oversight bodies are not currently looking at rehabilitation when they visit a facility, and they're not questioning the extent to which it covers all inmates on an equal basis. And I think the example just around persons with disabilities already raised that as a huge flag that ought to be on people's agenda when they do conduct oversight. So yes, I've taken note of all of that. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I see a hand from Esther. You may take the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you, the facilitator, and thank you for all the participants as well. I just want to add up on what the commissioner from Zimbabwe has said, the importance of the CSOs in our prisons. I can give an example of here in Malawi, under Federation of Persons with Disabilities in Malawi, they have formed the Disability District Forums, which are in every district in Malawi. Now, in our district in Cheo, the District Disability Forum is consistent of every DPO. There is a representative from every DPO. Now, we visited our prison here at the district in Cheo district. We found out that the prison is not disability friendly. The toilets is not accessible for wheelchair users. So we talked with the management up to the time point that we reached an agreement that they made them accessible, or even the buildings are accessible for persons with disabilities. We even engage with the officers whenever there are issues of persons with disabilities. Can give an example. There is an issue of a man who was a prisoner. He was in prison because he was suspected of murder. Now he was arrested together with 4 other suspects, but they were given a bail bond of 100,000. which other suspects managed to pay and went out. But this man with disability did not fund the amount of 100,000 to pay for the bail bond. Now, the officers, together with the District Disability Forum, we managed to source funds from our wishes so that we can pay for the bail bond for this person also to go out. So by the end of the day, we found a well-wisher who bailed the person out. And as I'm saying, the person is now out. So there is a very big impact that the CSOs can do to promote our prisons, also to look at the welfare of the prisoners who are living with disabilities or persons with disabilities who are in our prisons. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing the experiences of Malawi. We have one more chat from Winfred. The prison law should also address the way disabled people are called by prison officers. For example, some call them the crackhead person, the mad, and the idiots. Thank you. Another one from Paul, hiring persons with disabilities in prisons is also key. Thank you for that. Any more submissions, colleagues, for Anneke?
If I can comment, Ms. Malapo, just on the submissions that had been made.
Thank you.
I think the issue of language is a huge problem. And we do need to think about how we address that. I would think it's not just persons with disabilities who are being insulted within the prison environment, and probably other groups like LGBTIQ individuals might also face similar harassment by prison officers. And I think oversight bodies often only look at torture and assault and those sort of types of abuse, and not necessarily verbal abuse, without recognizing the problems that can cause and the impact that has on people. So I'm noting that down. I think it links both to discriminatory practices and to abusive practices, and one need to figure out how the oversight body then monitors that, and whether or not any complaints about that is then properly attended to in a way that it may change. So that, for example, if there are repeated complaints in a visitor's book or in the complaints management system that people are being insulted by the prison officers, then the head of the facility ought to have responded through some sort of sensitization training or whatever else, or disciplinary actions against such officers. And then the oversight body need to see if those things have been done, and if not, why not. So it does really go into a bit more detail on how one encourage an oversight body to look at different sort of complaints. I'm wondering if this would be something good for us to actually include within the model law. And then I think the point about bail is absolutely critical, and this is something we have mentioned in the model law, that oversight bodies need to assess if there are people who are staying prolonged periods in prison because on remand, because they cannot afford the bail, and then something ought to be done about that. But we haven't identified that within those groups of people there are again vulnerable categories that are more likely to not be able to pay the bail. And I like the example of how perhaps linking them up with DPOs can then actually assist them to address that specific need. So that's very useful, and I think a best practice that one can note. So thanks, Esther, for that.
Thank you, Annika. We have a hand from Winfred. Please go ahead, Winfred.
Yeah, thank you so much, team and colleague. I also thank my friend, Sister Chipo Mushota, for connecting me to you. I'm very glad about attending this session. Now, about the language that my sister Ken was talking about, how we can go about it. Like, for example, here in Uganda, we have some laws that, like the Disability Act, they do address the language that is referred to as when someone is calling for, instead of calling you a name, he or she calls you the type of disability you have. That when someone calls you your disability, instead of calling you your name, there is a fine that is supposed to pay. You take that person to court, he pays that fine. But again, the law is good, but it remained on paper. Operationalizing it is a problem. So when we are formulating the prisons law the model that we are discussing, I beg that we should borrow a leaf from that of Uganda, but again, we emphasize the operationalizing of that law so that it comes into practice. Again, we also, another issue that I should also supplement on Kenny's language, as she has put it, is when we put the law that concerns persons with disabilities, we should also endeavor to translate those laws, because those laws are not only for those who have no disabilities, they are for us, the person with disabilities. For me, I have physical disability. And when you put in place a law talking about accessibility of infrastructures and other facilities, and you put it there on paper, some of us, many of persons with disabilities do not go to school, but we can manage to read our local languages. So I request we also translate those laws into our local languages so that we all benefit from it, other than the elite who made the laws, like the parliament, like those people, the leaders, but even the grassroots person with disabilities has to get information and knowledge on the existing laws that supports and protects his or her rights. Again, there is also another submission that I want to put forward. Like some of our counterparts, the deaf persons, they sometimes they miss justice because of the communication. It is also under language. You find that someone is put on a case of defilement because he doesn't talk, and when they reach in court, there is no someone, there is no interpreter, there's no someone who can assist to tell the other people who are complaining that he did not do it. So justice fails because of lack of communication and communication barriers. So my request, when we are making the model, we should also come up with, I don't know how we can put it, like when there is a case for those persons with disabilities in prison, we should give lawyers to support them, so that because some of them are in jail, but with no case, they are innocent. But because some of them maybe failed to communicate, maybe they failed also to defend themselves ably. But when we put like a legal body which is protecting or defending person with disability, and it goes there, we hire lawyers. Like for us here in Uganda, we have what we call Justice Center. Justice Center is here, but it's supporting women. But for our case, as because I'm a leader of a women organization with disability, I happen to get a case of GBV in Uganda, and I approached those people of Justice Center. They helped me to bail out the other woman who was implicated that she burnt the husband's daughter. Because the lady couldn't talk, she was deaf, and they were putting that case on her. So the Justice Center helped me. They gave us a lawyer. We went to the court. We sat in the case, and the lady won the case at last. And we hired an interpreter. She spoke out the truth because she saw someone who burnt their daughter, but she couldn't talk to those people to understand that she was not the one. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Winfred, for your submission and experience from Uganda. Can you please mute, Winfred?
Yes.
Thank you. Mute your mic. Thank you so much. Thank you for your submission. I don't see any more hands. There's one from Ishmael. It says we must ensure that any reform institution catering for children with disabilities, have trained personnel, adequate facilities like ramps, adapted toilets, and disability-friendly leisure and educational activities. The rights of incarcerated children with disabilities have to be respected. Their rehabilitation may be more challenging, but adequate resources made available. All these as a matter of right and dignity and not sympathy and charity. Ishmael Owamia, Ombudsperson for Children, Office of Mauritius. And Commissioner from Zimbabwe wanted to highlight that inmates with disabilities end up depending on other inmates for support, movement, and other activities. This alone makes them prone to abuse by other inmates. Thank you for the submissions. I do not see any more hands up. Any last word in, Anneke?
Thank you so much, Ms. Malapo. I found this to be a really enriched conversation, and I've taken notes of many of points of all the points raised in the chat and that where people spoke. I think the linking the issue of communication barriers with the need to provide increased access to legal aid for persons with disabilities is actually quite critical and not something that's often mentioned. And I think it would be worth taking note of that and making sure that people are aware of it. And then, Commissioner, I love the point that you make about how persons with disabilities end up being so reliant on others when they aren't provided with the support that they need, and how this puts them at risk of abuse. And I think it's those sort of dynamics that all oversight bodies need to be trained on, because they're not automatically aware of it. And people might not themselves say it because they might feel embarrassed about the fact that they're relying on others. And so there's all these sort of hidden indignities that people face when they're within the prison system that doesn't really get spoken about. And unless we speak about it within oversight bodies, the oversight bodies themselves are going to be blind to it. And then we'll never be able to address the problems. And then Winfred and Ismail, I'm going to note down the practices around Uganda and Mauritius as best practices, I think, on how additional support can be provided. So I think this has been a really helpful conversation on an afternoon on a Monday. it's amazing what we can accomplish if we spend our time just talking together about how to improve things for those who are vulnerable. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Anneke. It has been a very enriching experience. Thank you so much, colleagues, for joining us today on this consultative process on the model law. I think we have one last submission is another challenge that the model law can address is about searching policies with respect of persons with disabilities who might be suspected of carrying prohibited items in prisons. New searching equipment include X-ray body scanners. Thank you for that. From Ravind Lugan. Thank you. There's still one hand from Winfred. Go ahead, Winfred.
Yes, Malopa. Just a point of inquiry. Now, after, as we have discussed on these issues on the model law, what is our way forward after this discussion?
Anneke, can you give direction, please?
Yes, so Winfred, I'm actually sad that you're in Uganda because the model law is being discussed by the SADC Parliamentary Forum, which does not include Uganda. But the other day when at one of the consultations we had the Speaker of Zimbabwe, when he was promoting the model law, he was from the Zimbabwe Parliament, suggested that discussions around prison oversight ought to also take place at the Pan-African parliamentary level, so that the discussions don't just remain within the SADC region. And I think what one can do is use the SADC model law once it's passed as to encourage the African Union and East African community and the ECOWAS community to then pass similar model laws. And there's nothing stopping a country who is not part of SADC to incorporate the proposed suggestions into its own laws. We have definitely, when drafting the model law, considered best practices from all across Africa, including Uganda, and those have been incorporated. So it does really stand as a model law for Africa. But for the moment, it's passing through the SADC Parliamentary Forum, and they are spearheading the process, but hopefully it can be extended much further following that. The idea would be that we have consultations now until the end of October. The model law will then be revised based on those consultations, and there would be a document which the public can then make further submissions into. The final model law will likely be passed by the SADC Parliamentary Forum mid-2026. And the idea would be not to have a law that you want all countries to adopt in full, but for every country to actually prioritize prison oversight, to look at the laws that they have, and then to see, based on the recommendations in the model law, which of their laws they can reform to improve the various oversight bodies that there are. So I hope this answers your question, Winfred, but we're very happy to have your input from Uganda, because I think there's a lot of we can learn, and we should always share cross-regionally, because there's so many good best practices across Africa, and we can really enrich each other's work. So I think you taking the time to spend with us both this morning and this afternoon has been really valuable, and we thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Akin. Again, I forgot to tell you, For me, I'm based in Uganda, but I'm the vice chairperson of Disabled Women in Africa. So I was asking that question so that I follow up with my other African countries and also get information on what I can share with them. That's the reason why I attended this session. So the whole continent of Africa, we have women and men with disabilities. So I think the model law will help us to address some of those challenges that we've managed to put forward before you, Aken. Thank you.
Thank you, Winfred. If there is nothing else, colleagues, we may share our technical experiences, our country experiences, best practices to enrich the process and to inform our drafter at prisons@sadacpf.org so that we still enrich the process even further. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come and share with us. If there is nothing else, thank you all for coming. I think there's 2 comments from Esther. It says, if you ever need to partner with us, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you, Esther. Anneke, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Anneke has shared the outline of the model law in the comments section for those who are interested in downloading. Please, you can download the model law. And the model law can still be shared. And thank you for coming. ICT, I think we can end the session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, everyone. And good evening.
Thank you.